piece of chalk. I remember one splendid morning, all blue and silver, in the summer holidays when I reluctantly tore myself away from the task of doing nothing in particular, and put on a hat of some sort, and pick up a walking stick, and put 6 very bright colored chalks in my pocket. I then went into the kitchen, which along with the rest of the house, belonged to a very square and sensible old woman in a Sussex village, and asked the owner and occupant of the kitchen if she had any brown paper. She had a great deal, in fact, she had too much, and she mistook the purpose and the rationale of the existence of brown paper. She seemed to have an idea that if a person wanted brown paper, he must be wanting to tie up parcels, which was the last thing I wanted to do. Indeed, it is a thing which I have found to be beyond my mental capacity. Hence, she dwelt very much on the varying qualities of toughness and endurance in the material. I explained to her that I only wanted to draw pictures on it, and that I did not want them to endure in the least, and that from my point of view, therefore, it was a question not of tough consistency, but of responsive surface, a thing comparatively irrelevant in a parcel. When she understood that I wanted to draw, she offered to overwhelm me with note paper, apparently supposing that I did my notes and correspondence on brown paper wrappers from motives of economy. I then tried to explain the rather delicate logical shade, that I not only like brown paper, but like the quality of brownness in paper, just as I like the quality of brownness in October woods, or in beer, or in the peat streams of the north. Brown paper represents the primal twilight of the first dawn of creation, and with a bright colored chalk, or two, you can pick out points of fire in it, sparks of gold and blood red and sea green, like the first fierce stars that sprang out of divine darkness. All this I said in an offhand way to the old woman, and I put the brown paper in my pocket along with the chalks, and possibly other things. I suppose everyone must have reflected how flammable and how poetical are the things that one carries in one pocket. The pocket knife, for instance, the type of all human tools, the infant of the sword. Once I planned to write a book of poems entirely about the times in my pockets, but I found it would be too long, and the age of the great epics is past. With my stick and my knife, my chalks and my brown paper, I went out onto the great downs. I crawled across those colossal contours that express the best quality of England, because they are at the same time soft and strong. The smoothness of them has the same meaning as the smoothness of great cart horses or the smoothness of the beech tree. It declares in the teeth of our timid and cruel tourists that the mighty are merciful. As my eyes swept the landscape was as kindly as any of its cottages, but for power, it was like an earthquake. The villages in the immense valley were safe. One could see for centuries, yet the lifting of the whole land was like the lifting of one enormous wave to wash them all away. I crossed one swell of living turf after another, looking for a place to sit down and draw. Do not, for heaven's sake, imagine I was going to sketch from nature. I was going to draw devils and seraphim, and blind old gods that men worship before the dawn of right, and saints in robes of angry crimson, and seas of strange green, and all the sacred of monstrous symbols that look so well in bright colors on brown paper. They are much better worth drawing than nature. Also, they are much easier to draw. When a cow came slouching by in the field next to me, I must might have drawn it, but I always get wrong in the hind legs of quadrupeds, so I drew the soul of the cow, which I saw there plainly walking before me in the sunlight, and the soul was all purple and silver, and had 7 horns and the mystery that belongs to all the beasts. But though I could not with the crayon get the best out of the landscape, it does not follow that the landscape was not getting the best out of me. And this, I think, is the mistake that people make about the old poets who lived before Wordsworth, and were supposed not to care very much about nature because they did not describe it much. They preferred to write great men to writing about great hills, but they sat on a great hills to write it. They gave out much less about nature, but they drank in. They painted the white robes of their holy virgins with the blinding snow, at which they had stared all day. They blazoned the shields of their paladins with the purple and gold of many heraldic sunsets. The greenness of 1,000 green leaves clustered into the live green figure of Robin Hood. The blueness of a score of forgotten skies become the blue robes of the Virgin. The inspiration went in like sunbeams and came out like Apollo. But as I sat scrawling these silly figures on the brown paper, it began to dawn on me, to my great disgust, that I had left one chalk, and that a most exquisite and essential chalk behind. I searched all my pockets, but I could not find any white chalk. Now those who are acquainted with all the philosophy nigh religion, which is typified in the art of drawing on brown paper, know that white is positive and essential. I cannot avoid remarking here upon a moral significance, one of the wise and awful truths which this brown paper art reveals is this, that white is a color. It is not the mere absence of color, it is a shining and affirmative thing, as fierce as red, as definite as black. When, so to speak, your pencil grows red hot, it grows roses. When it grows white hot, it grows stars. And one of the 2 or 3 defiant verities of the best religious morality, of real Christianity, for example, is exactly this same thing. The cheap assertion of religious morality is that white is a color. Virtue is not the absence of vices or the avoidance of moral dangers. Virtue is a vivid and separate thing, like pain or a particular smell. Mercy does not mean not being cruel or sparing people revenge or punishment. It means a plain and positive thing like the sun, which one has either seen or not seen. Chastity does not mean abstention from sexual. It means something flaming, like Joan of Arc. In a word, God paints in many colors, but He never paints so gorgeously. I had almost said so gaudily, as when He paints in white. In a sense, our age has realized this fact, and expressed it in our solemn costume. For if it were really true that the white was a blank and colorless tint, negative and non-committal, then white would be used instead of black and gray from the funeral dress of this pessimistic period. We should see city gentlemen in frock coats of spotless silver lining, with top hats as white as wonderful arum lilies, which is not the case. Meanwhile, I could not find my chalk. I sat on the hill in a sort of despair. There was no town nearer than Chesterton at which it was even remotely probable that there would be such a thing as an artist's colorman. And yet, without white, my absorbed little pictures would be as pointless as the world would be if there were no good people in it. I stared stupidly round, breaking my brain for expedients. Then I suddenly stood up and roared with laughter, again and again, so that the cows stared at me and called a committee. Imagine a man in the Sahara regretting that he had no sun for his hourglass. Imagine a gentleman in mid-ocean wishing that he had brought some salt water with him for his chemical experiments. I was sitting on an immense warehouse of white chalk. The landscape was made entirely out of white chalk. White chalk was about more miles until it met the sky. I stooped and broke a piece of the rock I sat on. It did not mark so well as the sharp chalks do, but it gave the effect, and I stood there in a trance of pleasure, realizing that the southern England is not only a grand peninsula, and a tradition and a civilization. It is something even more admirable. It is a piece of chalk.
Since the essay A Piece of Chalk by G.K. Chesterton on the theme desire, prudence, resilience, happiness, independence, and genuinity, and very early on in the essay, the reader realizes that Chesterton will be exploring the theme of desire. Chesterton wishes to walk out on the fields and do some drawing, not the typical drawing of the animals in the fields, but more mystical creatures that he can draw from his memory. The only problem is that Chesterton has no brown paper, and he has to ask his landlady for the paper, and she generously obeys Chesterton, who is in her own mind has a different type of landscape that he intends to draw. This could be significant as Chesterton, by drawing or pulling form, the mystic is highlighting his independence when it comes to what others might draw. He sees it pointless to draw the landscape and is much more interested in drawing other things that he thinks are more valuable and are more realistic to his needs. Under no circumstances does Chesterton simply wish to draw the landscape, as everybody else seems to do so. Chesterton does encounter one slight problem, and that is the fact that he has no white chalk with him. However, by using his own ingenuity, he breaks off pieces of rock and begins to draw the sky in front of him on the little piece of brown paper. Though some critics might suggest that Chesterton is defeating the purpose of his plan to avoid painting the landscape, he is left with no other alternative, which may be the point that Chesterton is attempting to make. He may be suggesting that at times a man can only do the best they can with the tools at their disposal. If anything, Chesterton is being prudent rather than going on his search of a piece of white chalk which he knows he will not find. Chesterton appears to be doing the best he can in a very difficult situation, which may lead some readers to suggest that Chesterton is resilient. In anything, Chesterton does not allow for himself to be beaten by the fact that he has no white chalk. What is also interesting about the story is how determined Chesterton is to not paint a landscape like the masters who have come before him. He wants his piece of art to be defining and original, a piece that some may look at and not necessarily see what is drawn. A precursor for many pieces of art. It takes a person a while to understand that has been drawn. In this way, Chesterton is showing his uniqueness. He is following his own lead and allowing for himself to be independent of others. As to whether others will appreciate Chesterton's drawing is another thing. Though, the reader suspects that when Chesterton is happy, that is all that matters. Chesterton really walks in his own path, a path that is not influenced by others, which would further suggest that Chesterton is independent of others. He does not necessarily rely on their opinion or what they might think. He is comfortable in his own skin, a point further noticeable by Chesterton desires to walk in the fields on his own. The end of this story is also interesting as Chesterton is command to normality when he's using the pieces of white chalk to draw the landscape. He needs to feel his page in order for the drawing to make sense. This may be significant as Chesterton may feel that the landscape, after all, is an important part of the imagery of the drawing. Without a landscape, the drawing may look no more like doodles, and ever the perfection. Chesterton draws the sky white by using the pieces of rock. He knows he has no choice but to do so, but the abundance of white rock around him in the field is ideal for his purposes, giving his drawing the shape it needs and hopefully a fuller explanation to those who view the drawing. So happy is Chesterton after he finishes the drawing that he compares the white rock to the white chalk and sees no difference. He may have started out without a piece of white chalk, but the end is different. Though his ingenuity and resilience, Chesterton has managed to finish his drawing, a drawing that he himself is proud of and one expects the others will be proud of too. Chesterton has taken what would have been of tortoise day and turned into a day of ingenuity and happiness.
A Piece of Chalk is the story written by Gilbert Keith Chesterton. The story that has a deep meaning about life. It is about a person that have a different perspective in life. As I read the story, I gradually understand that every person has different set of mind. Even if we have the same understanding about the rules or meaning of life, we have a different expression to it. Based on the story, Chesterton do not like to do such thing as others do. What he wants is to build or create a different masterpiece that came out from his imagination. He also knows the importance of understanding the matter of one thing. When he explained the comparison of white chalk and the stone, he said that the landscape is made out of white chalk, and you can only see a white color when you look at the farther side. I realize in this sentence that if we want to understand other side, we just need to look at the whole part of them. We should understand that our life is different from others. Try to appreciate big pictures than looking only on what your eyes can see. And if it ever crosses our mind to ask why others can understand us, why do we need to have different perspective in life? In this story, I understand that being different is not bad for us. We just needed to make our life more meaningful.
In A Piece of Chalk by Gilbert Keith Chesterton, we have the theme of desire, prudence, resilience, happiness, independence, and genuinity. Chesterton was a smart, independent man because he is following his own lead and allowing for himself to be independent of others. Chesterton really walks his own path, a path that is not influenced by others, which would further suggest that Chesterton is independent of others. He does not necessarily rely on their opinion or what they might think. He is comfortable in his own skin. Chesterton is not paint a landscape like the masters who have one before him. He wants his piece of art to be defining and original. In this way, Chesterton is showing his uniqueness. The moral lesson in this essay of A Piece of Chalk by Gilbert Keith Chesterton: let's be smart and be strong, and we should also learn how to be independent for ourselves. And like Chesterton, he does not rely on what others think. And that's correct because we should be the one who should make our own way and not the other people. And we have own uniqueness.
Definition of terms. First is reluctantly. It means in an unwilling and hesitant way. Here's the some common synonyms of reluctant are adverse, disinclined, hesitant, and loath. While all these words mean lacking that will or desire to do something indicated, reluctant implies a holding back through unwillingness. Dwelt, meaning live in or at a specified place. Example, according to this, a pilgrim returning from the Holy Land was cast by a storm on a desolate island where dwelt a hermit. Colorman, meaning a person who deals in paints. Example, artists and colormen combined natural, and, these days, synthetic pigments with media such as oils and resins, much as the perfumer carefully formulates natural and synthetic chemical compounds, according the Times Literary Supplement, 2008. Expedient, meaning an expedient is an action that achieves a particular purpose but may not be morally right. Example, he pretended to be energized by the expedient of wearing his shirt with the sleeveless rolled up. And the story was a temporary expedient. Abstention, meaning abstention is a formal act of not voting either for or against a proposal. Example, a vote of 16 in favor, 3 against, and 1 abstention. Another example, the number of abstentions is likely to be crucial. Last example from abstention is abstention is traditionally high in Colombia. Sullen, meaning gloomily or resentfully silent or repressed. Example, someone who is sullen is bad-tempered and does not speak much. Another example, the offenders slapped into a sullen silence, and many of them remain sullen and resentful. Defiant. If you say that someone is defiant, you mean they show aggression or independence by refusing to obey someone. Example, the players are in defiant mode as they prepared for tomorrow's game. Verity. Word forms in plural verities, countable noun, usually plural, meaning the verities of something are all the things that are believed to be true about it. Something verities of human nature. In synonyms, it means fact, truth, reality, and gospel. Blazon, meaning to proclaim loudly and publicly. Crawling, to write something quickly without trying to make your writing tidy or easy to read. Examples, I scrawled a quick note to Judith and put it under her door. Another example, someone had scrawled grafted across the wall.